And first off, I also want to thank the people that are not here today, because we have our nurses on the road doing a lot of the hard work. We have our admin team working remotely, keeping everything going, because without them we wouldn't be here today, and without them we couldn't be serving our clients in the community. Thanks for everyone coming here today. So I started this journey with intensive care at home way back when. Some of you might know I am a critical care nurse by background, and I was doing my nurse training in Germany way back when, and I started working in ICU immediately after my nurse training. Really enjoyed it in there. Then I heard about this startup company sort of in the early 2000s in Germany, you know, that was similar to intensive care at home in Munich. And I thought, well, that sounds exciting. That is something that I'm very interested in. And I joined them as an employee at the time, and we were the first ones in Germany launching intensive care at home, and we were actively recruiting patients from ICU going home, predominantly with ventilation and tracheostomy. I did that for a couple of years. It was one of my best experiences that I had in terms of my nursing career. Then I went overseas. I worked in the UK in ICU, and then I came to Australia in 2005. Went back into ICU, you know, worked in Sydney, worked in Perth, worked in Melbourne, and all I could see in ICU in Australia was patients that we would have looked after at home in Germany. That's all I was seeing. And I said to doctors, I said to nurses, well, this patient would be at home in Germany, and people said, oh, that wouldn't be possible. I said, well, we've done it. It's happening in Europe already. So that was sort of, for me, when I had a look around in Australia, is anything happening here that is sort of a similar nature? I couldn't find it. Which then eventually led me to the path, okay, well, let's fill this niche, let's fill this need for intensive care at home. Now, I had no idea in the early days who would fund it, no idea where the money was coming from, but I knew there was a need, and I knew someone would be paying for this. That was in 2011, 2012 when I started the business. I had no idea that the NDS would be a thing one day. I had no idea where the money would be coming from, but lo and behold, I was, you know, knocking at doors. I got the service accredited, starting to knock at doors, and I found mainly closed doors in the beginning. People were saying, oh, you can't do intensive care. And I said, well, we've been doing it in Europe for the last 5 years. There's no reason why it wouldn't happen here. So eventually, sort of some people within the industry were warming up to the idea. It looks like after sort of a couple of years of knocking at doors, some doors were opening, mainly with the TAC at the time. There were some clients that the TAC identified could benefit from our service. And, you know, we got in front of the first TAC client in probably 2013, 2014, who was a client, a C1 spinal injury client, ventilated tracheostomy, got back to ICU almost weekly. He had a team of support workers and general registered nurses, but they couldn't keep him home predictably. So the TAC was funding our service in the early days, and we put a stop to that immediately. So when we worked with the client, he never went back to ICU ever. So we proved our model pretty quickly, within a few months really. It wasn't without challenges in the beginning, as you can imagine. As much as we proved the model, there were also other providers that were trying to keep us out of the market quite early. They didn't succeed, but you know, we could see things that I wasn't prepared for, because I realized, oh, we're potentially infringing on some people's territory that were trying to provide this service with support workers. And now all of a sudden ICU nurses come in. Yes, they are more expensive, but still much cheaper than someone going into an ICU bed, right? Let alone the quality of life for the patients and the families. So the TAC was funding in the early days. We were also doing some home TPN stuff. I'm not sure whether people are familiar with the TPN. Basically what TPN is intravenous nutrition, mainly given in ICU as well. Some of it is given on hospital wards as well. People have a central line, a PIC line, or a Hickman's line, or a port. Again, a very specialized skill that needs an ICU nurse, so we were doing some home TPN. Then we were doing some palliative care in the early days, also for TAC clients that had a tracheostomy, where we were involved. And then as we went along, again, the NDS was still a million miles away. We were getting some Department of Health funding, And the inquiries came through some of the hospitals, Monash in particular, and Monash was actually trying to get us in front of the clients and saying, well, we know they need help, but we don't know how to get the funding, right? And Monash was struggling with some of those clients going back to hospital all the time, right? So anyway, in the end, we got in front of the Department of Health, and we were basically doing with the Department of Health what we are doing today with the NDIS. We were basically just submitting nursing assessments to the Department of Health, and we were saying, hey, you know, we think this client will be at home 24 hours a day, predictably, with our service, because they were more or less living in ICU, right? And if they were going home, the families couldn't cope, and they were bouncing back in no time. So again, probably the same then when we first got started with the TAC, we did some nursing assessments. You know, it's not that the Department of Health, similar to the NDIS, they're not just writing a check, you've got to provide all the evidence. You know, it's quite arduous. You got to get a nursing assessment, you probably got to get an OT assessment, physio assessment, doctor's letter. But you know, we also found that once we've got that, the funding was following, right? People could see value in what we were doing in terms of, okay, well, we can't have these people live in ICU. Palliative care for a child is not really an option, right? Because there were a lot of kids in the early days. And with a couple of the palliative care cases that we did, we then also provided palliative care to the Children's Hospital for a couple of years. Then we got funding through the Children's Hospital directly. And then really the NDIS kicked in with nursing care, which would have been around the 1st of October 2019, if I remember this correctly. And then everything changed from there really. All of a sudden, NDIS participants were having nursing funding. It was still patchy in the early days, but we could see there was an avenue. Most clients didn't have 24-hour nursing care just as yet, but at least they had night shifts or they had some day shifts funded. And then we quickly identified that's not enough. And then again, we did the same then we did with the Department of Health. We were doing nursing assessments, getting doctors letters, physio assessments, OT assessments, you know, and we could see, okay, there's definitely an avenue now to get those clients onto 24-hour nursing care with ICU nurses predictably. Now, what we've also found is that, you know, with NDIS support coordination in particular, some NDIS support coordinators are fantastic, and there's never been an issue with funding for the clients with the right NDIS support coordinator. And I can mention David Cox here. I'm sure he can verify that. You know, you've been heavily involved with one of our clients.
It's been hard work.
Absolutely. No shortcuts. No shortcuts. But, you know, we've seen this over and over again that with the right team, whether it's NDIS support coordination, whether it's the OTs, the physios, the right doctors on the books, you know, the funding will follow, right? There's no question about that. But we've also seen that if
there's definitely resistance from the NDIS.
There's resistance, but what we've also seen, okay, so let's take the best case scenarios. The best case scenario is 24-hour nursing care with ICU nurses for predominantly ventilation tracheostomy. Let's take the worst case scenario where we had clients in the early days when NDIS was starting to fund nursing care. We didn't know enough about the NDIS. We were funded for night shifts. For two clients, one was with a tracheostomy, the other one was ventilated with a tracheostomy. They were both children. And we knew that when we left there in the morning, those lives were hanging at a thread. And we highlighted that to everyone that was involved there. And both of those kids died during the day, just as we predicted, right? It's still, the NDIS is still busy trying to sweep it under the carpet to this day, right? And one of those kids was 4 weeks away from having the tracheostomy removed, right? It's just unheard of, right? And we know of other clients in the community too, where we weren't involved, that had support workers or even general registered nurses not being able to provide the care that we can provide, where people have died. We know that, we have evidence for it. I'm not making it up, you know. So yes, there is resistance from the NDIS, there's no question about it. By the same token, we see that with the right evidence, the doors open. Yes, there's often sort of an arduous way to get to the funding, including sometimes the AAT, thank you, the AAT. As a last resort, most clients we've now seen are not going to the AAT because it's almost embarrassing for the NDIS to let this go to the AAT. You know, that's what we've also seen now over the years. So whilst the NDIS is by no means perfect, it certainly has improved the space a lot, I think, and hopefully it continues to improve. Other funding bodies that we tapped in over the years now is the DVA, Department of Veteran Affairs. The hospital funding and DHS funding has pretty much disappeared with NDIS. I don't know whether there's other people in the room who still know about DHS funding in this space. I haven't heard of it. Our next step in terms of funding avenues will be private health insurance, but we're not there yet because we need to get to another level of accreditation beyond the NDIS and ACIS accreditation that we have. Our clients, I think, when we talk to our clients one-on-one and we get feedback, overall we get very good feedback. There's always a disgruntled client, of course, and there's always room for improvement. It is a high-touch service that we are providing. And what we've also learned in the early days, we were able to literally rock up and get the job done because we had the skills. But what we've also found over the years now, which is sort of an evolution in the business, the clients want the same nurses over and over again, even in case of a last-minute sick call. Well, why can't you send me John tonight instead of Mary? I know John is available, and if we can't make that happen, we have very disgruntled clients and they make it absolutely our problem. I can see some people smiling there in the background. It's the same in home care. It's such a high-touch service that if we can't get the right people to the right client at the right time, we've moved on from keeping people out of hospital, which was our primary goal in the early days, to now having an absolute tailor-made solution for the clients to send the right nurse at the right time, or the right team of nurses at the right time. That's certainly been the evolution for us in the last few years, where we have to be more responsive to what the clients want in even more detail. Right, and I'm sure any other home care provider doesn't have to be intensive care at home, even in the support worker space. It's all about people. It's all about people. Other things that we've seen over the years now is, I mentioned palliative care in the beginning. So there's certainly an element of palliative care that we are doing where some of our clients, unfortunately most of them are all degenerating slowly but surely. But again, when we talk to the clients, where do they want to be? I think there's some research out there, 75% of people in Australia want to die at home, and 15% actually do die at home.
Very sad.
It's very sad, and for me, and it's a shame that none of our nurses are here today because they're all out on the road, but for me, having worked in ICU and having seen many palliative care cases in ICU, I always thought deep down, there must be a better way. There must be a better way. And I think we found a better way. Again, it's by no means perfect, but in ICU, just looking at the COVID years, think about the families that have lost loved ones in ICU during COVID that couldn't go there. It was bad, palliative care was bad before COVID, I think, in ICU, let alone what those families went through during COVID. So there's an element of palliative care. Having said that, there are also clients on our books, C1, C2 spinal injuries that are otherwise healthy. The only thing that really confines them to a ventilator or a tracheostomy is their spinal injury. If they stay healthy otherwise, they could live for decades. Other, in terms of conditions that we are looking after, as I mentioned, spinal injuries, there is certainly a degree of cerebral palsy that we're looking after. spinal muscular atrophy. There has also been a lot of improvement with spinal muscular atrophy. So we were 2016, 2017, the Children's Hospital engaged us to look after some kids with spinal muscular atrophy, most of them on NIV, on BiPAP or CPAP, and they were all going home initially to die. The Children's Hospital thought, you know, they might have a life expectancy of maybe a year or two. And then a trial drug came in, Spinraza, I'm pretty sure it's Spinraza. A trial drug came in, Spinraza, and all of those kids, yes, they still stayed on BiPAP, but they're all still alive, right? So there's other developments in the space where, you know, on the one hand it's our service, on the other hand it's, you know, what latest medications are out there that can be trialed and are effective. Obviously, you know, most of those kids will still stay on BiPAP probably for the rest of their lives, but the life expectancy for an SMA child was, I think, 10 years at the most, you know, and they've already bypassed that mark now. So, you know, there's really some good developments out there overall. Another thing, and I've completely gone off my presentation, but it's just, you know, just thinking what else is out there. Another thing that we've done now in the last 2 years is we're doing more and more home x-rays. So there's mobile radiology in Melbourne now, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane and Adelaide, and shout out, you know, to those to mobile radiology. We can get them out to do a home x-ray if we think our client has a chest infection instead of them going to ED. So the infrastructure in the community is definitely widening, where other people can see what we can see, that there is no need for to go into ED, right? There is now another organization that we worked with, is My Emergency Doctor. You can get an emergency consultant 24 hours a day, and they've also been brilliant in supporting what we are doing and what our clients want. I mean, we all, you know, all of us are in business here if our clients are at home. We don't have a business if our clients bounce between hospital and home. It's all about that predictability of staying at home, and I think that's probably our biggest win, that we've managed to find a pathway and created a tailor-made solution that our clients can stay home predictably. Because what we've seen, again, when we first started, we could see clients bouncing between hospitals and homes, right? And families in particular, parents, spouses being at risk of losing their jobs, right? Because they could not keep a job because they were basically on call when their family member was going back into hospital. They wouldn't leave their bedside, of course, right? So I think we've really saved some family units as well with our service. So coming back maybe to the NDIS, like I said, there's been a huge sort of shift now towards more and more NDIS funding. Bringing it back to that, what we've also found then over the years is, again, coming back to NDIS support coordinators, I would have had phone calls over the years from NDIS support coordinators telling me, hey, I've got a participant here in ICU, they've got a ventilator, they've got a tracheostomy, can you take them home? And I say, sure, bread and butter for us. Tell me the location, tell me when you want to start. And then they say, yeah, but there's a problem because the NDIS will only fund support workers. And then I say, well, that's a death sentence. And then they go like, yeah, but you don't understand the NDIS. And I say, I do understand the NDIS. We wouldn't be in business if the NDIS wasn't funding the critical care nurse, right? So the knowledge gaps that we've seen with NDIS support coordinators is huge. You know, like on the one hand, you know, we've worked with David for many years now, and we know other brilliant NDIS support coordinators where funding has never been an issue. Never, right? It's all about the NDIS support coordinators knowing what to do, knowing who to talk to, knowing what evidence to get. There's an NDIS support coordinator in our network. She was invited, but she couldn't make it today. She used to work as an NDIS planner. So she's been on the other side, and she knows exactly what needs to be done to get the 24-hour nursing care over the line, right? Because she's been on the other side. So with the discrepancies that we've seen between NDIS support coordinators, that led us down the path to start looking for our own, because I just thought, hang on a second, I can't continue dealing with that, what I saw as ineptness. We have to take charge ourselves here, and I just always believe we can do this much better if we have the right people on board, which is when we started advertising for our own NDIS support coordinator. So that's how we eventually came to Amanda. And Amanda has already made a big difference since she started working with us earlier in the year. So again, thank you so much for joining us and bringing this group together today as well again. So that's sort of how we got here to this point. That also leads me, so in terms of the organisation itself, we've now got clients in Sydney as well. We're now looking for an NDIS support coordinator in Sydney as well. We've got clients now in Brisbane. Just this week we took our first night shift client home in Brisbane, also M&D with a tracheostomy. So that's just happened this week. So we're certainly expanding, and that's also NDIS funded there, working towards 24-hour nursing care funding there. We are now going as far in Victoria. We're going as far as Bendigo. We're going as far as Warragul, in Gippsland. We have done, even a couple of years ago, we would have done a fly-in, fly-out roster for Wagga Wagga, flying in people from Sydney mainly to Wagga Wagga. That was also very challenging. No ICU nurses in Wagga Wagga. So we've certainly broadened our skill and expertise, including what we're doing behind the scenes, which means we have, what I argue, a highly functioning rostering team. Because we have to have all of our shifts filled. We have lives in our hands, and they're constantly, the phone is ringing 24 hours a day. How do we fill that shift, that last minute sick call? How do we serve this new client that wants to start on Friday? How do we make all of that happen? So again, I can't thank our highly functioning admin team, rostering, finance, our nurses on the road doing the hard yards, right? Can't thank them enough, because nothing would happen without them. So that's sort of how we got here. We think from what we can see at the moment, there seems to be more and more inquiries. When I still worked in ICU, I always believed there was a reluctance from doctors, even nurses, to do a tracheostomy for some patients, because what I refer to is they had no perceived options. No perceived options. It's just a perception. We made it a reality for them, right? And again, this comes back to my experience in Germany. I could see patients in ICU that we looked after at home in Germany, and then I could see patients in ICU that weren't getting the tracheostomy, that would have gotten a tracheostomy in Germany because there was an option for them to go home, right? And one of the other issues here in Australia at the moment that I can see, in Europe, most of it is health insurance funding. And what do the health insurances say? They say, we're paying for this ICU bed $5,000 a day. Well, with intensive care at home, we're cutting the cost by half. So the health insurance says, tell me more. The family says, tell me more, right? Whereas here, it's great that the NDIS is a real thing now, but the NDIS and the hospitals are not communicating, right? Everyone's nodding their head. The NDIS and the health NDIS and the departments of health in the States are not communicating. So our argument that we can cut the cost of an ICU bed by half, no one's really interested in, right? What is of interest for the hospitals is the empty bed. That is definitely of interest, right? But there seems to be almost this, if the states and the federal government were looking at the bigger picture, right? There's not only a business case, but there's a human case, of course, in that. But there's also a business case, right? So, and I don't know how we can change the NDIS talking to the departments of health and vice versa. The other thing that we are seeing when we talk to hospitals, and I'm sure some of you will see that, the hospitals have no idea about the NDIS. If I talk
And
to...
with that, just can you go into also how the disconnect with the discharge summary, like all the people?
What do you mean with the discharge summary?
So just when there's no conversation between NDIS and the hospitals, and the hospitals don't understand NDIS, so then when they do a discharge to somebody to like your services, which I've been working on at the moment, there's no communication of equal language.
Yeah, no, there isn't. And as much as some hospitals now technically have what's an NDIS liaison person or disability liaison, from what we've seen, not every hospital has it. And if they do have it, even they seem to be lacking insights. Right. The other thing is, still, when I talk to some ICU nurses or ICU doctors and I tell them, hey, our clients are NDIS funded, they go, what are you talking about? They have absolutely no idea that the NDIS could be a vehicle to manage some of their in-demand ICU beds. Right? So there's a lot of, look, we've come a long way, there's no question about it. We've come a long way, and even though we've been around now for 12 years, I still feel like we're just scratching the surface here. Just scratching the surface. That's what it looks like to me. Am I running out of time, Amanda?
You are. Patrik will have you chatting all day. As you can see, he's very passionate.
Yeah, very passionate. That's good. Good on you.
Rosalie?
Patrik, how many nurses do you employ?
Yeah, our team now would be around 110 in total. There would be around 12 admin staff. So roughly 100 nurses. Roughly 100 nurses across 3 states.
Across 3 states?
No, actually we've done our first shift in Adelaide a couple of weeks ago. Actually 4 states now.
Can I ask a question to you? I know quite a few nurses in Wollongong especially. Does the nurse need to be registered with the NDIS, or do they come under your company? Like, how does that work?
Great question. So when we get audited by the NDIS, when we go through our accreditation, all of our nurses need to have an NDIS worker screen, and they need to have done the NDIS worker module.
Okay, that's easy, isn't it?
It's easy.
Yeah.
So those 2 components are unique to the NDIS. Everything else is, the staff training that we offer.
Are you always looking for nurses?
Pretty much.
Imagine you
Pretty
would.
much. Look, I can talk about that if it's of interest. We couldn't find staff pretty much up until 2022. Felt like we were advertising on Seek and there's just nothing. And then 2022, when sort of COVID was finally fading out, ICU nurses were leaving hospitals in droves.
Yeah.
Hospitals in droves. Frustrated, burned out.
Yeah.
And since then our staffing situation has changed. And I'd say we are close to fully staffed. So, which also tells me that ICU nurses want to work for us, which is good, right? They can see the value. And yeah, it has shifted big time. Thank you. Over to Richard.
Yeah, one slide.
Thank you, Patrik.
Thank you. All of that on the picture.
That's right, it's a great summary, isn't it? I've got 47 slides, I hope that's okay. Does it come through? Oh, there we go. Thanks, Jamie.
No problem.
All right. Okay, no worries. So my name is Richard Napper. I work for ResMed. My name's Napa. It's a bit weird. Meant to be, maybe. Thanks for the invitation today. I've been on Patrik's mailing list probably for about 10 years, I think, and we sort of recently got in touch because I've taken over the role of hospital sales for ResMed. So previously, I worked in Sydney at ResMed, so I started 19 years ago. I was a very young person when I started at ResMed. I'm an engineer originally. I worked in product management on some of the ventilators for ResMed. I did complaints investigations, so if machines break, I had to investigate why. And about 7 years ago, I decided to move to Melbourne. We've got a lot of family down here, and the sales job came in, so I looked after Melbourne and Victoria and Tasmania. So the hospitals, but also the shops that sell CPAPs to patients as well. And in the last year, I've just taken on the job of hospital sales manager for ResMed, which has been really good. And I definitely sort of agree with your sentiment, Patrik, around keeping patients at home. And although I guess I'm the hospital sales manager, a lot of the patients obviously on ResMed ventilators are in home care. So for me, when I started in the job, it was about understanding the hospitals and the different tenders that we have on. But definitely a theme that I've noticed talking to a lot of the hospitals is that shift to NDIS funding. A lot of the hospitals are under pressure for their budgets and things like that, and you know, the NDIS has sort of become more prominent in the last sort of couple of years on how they're getting patients into home. I just thought I'd put up this slide and sort of excuse me if this is all really obvious to everyone, but I thought it might be a good way just to sort of frame up the discussion a little bit. So in terms of the hospital and what ResMed does in the hospital, our activities, we have a lot to do with the sleep services in the hospital, obviously. So ResMed has titration solutions and diagnostic solutions that we put into the sleep labs in the hospitals, and a lot of those sort of titration solutions are for titrating bilevel devices as well. We give masks into the sleep labs too, so they can trial out patients on the masks and make sure the fits are right and all their settings are right. For ResMed though, the sleep service is important because it generates scripts for us. So when ResMed goes into a sleep lab, we don't really want to sell a lot of product into the lab, but we want that lab to produce ResMed scripts. We work a little bit in ICU and emergency. You probably know ResMed, we don't make ICU level ventilators, they're more sort of Draeger and GE and those sorts of companies. We have a few disposable masks that some of the ICUs use, the AccuCare range, but not really a big presence in the ICU or emergency. We don't really transport ventilators like the oxylogs and things like that. All that stuff is really home care. We do a lot of work in the respiratory ward, obviously, so providing devices that are used in the hospital. So we've got a good range of devices there. And we work a lot with the hospital physicians. So, you know, and that's something it's a small team that we have, but we try and cover try and work with as many of the hospital physicians as we can, just so they're aware of the products that we have, how to use the technology, how to set up the devices appropriately. So as part of that, it's visiting the hospital, but we also sponsor their meetings where we can, so the TSANZ meetings and the ASA meeting and things like that. On the side, as part of that, we work with research groups, so ResMed sponsors investigator-initiated research in hospitals. So a lot of the physicians and the scientists want to do research, and we're a part of that. And we also have a lot of private physicians that we work with as well, and they might have a public appointment in the hospital, and they might sort of be outside of the hospital in their private rooms as well. We work with the biomedical departments as well. They need to buy spare parts to service the devices in the hospital. So the patients, and please add to this if I miss anything, but the patients might come into the hospital from a GP referral. So the GP decides that they might have sleep apnea or a respiratory condition, they get referred in. The physicians themselves can obviously refer into the hospital for a sleep test. Patient might have an accident, or they might have an exacerbation. COPD patient might bounce back into hospital. In terms of where they're going, this is where we really think about the funding. So the majority of ResMed CPAP patients are privately paying patients. So they'll get discharged from hospital maybe with a script for a device, and they might end up in a ResMed retail store, and we're sort of rebranding those to make them more obvious and things, but we also have a really big network of wholesale partners that we work with, so independent businesses that set up patients on CPAP. Some of those businesses as well do set up patients on the Loomis devices, so the more basic kind of NIV device that we have. I think if the hospital and the physician trusts a certain partner, they might refer patients in for bi-level therapy and they get their settings and things. But that's where a lot of the patients end up. Federal funding, and this is the area I think we all kind of acknowledge is growing a little bit. So NDIS obviously is a big part of that. In New Zealand it's through FARMAC, so there's sort of a federal kind of funding body in New Zealand that covers CPAP and things. State funding, so this sort of really covers the hospitals, if you like. So in New South Wales, for example, we work with Enable, and they provide funding for patients on everything from CPAP all the way through to life support ventilation, patients who require that level of support. There's another group up in Queensland, the Queensland Health Sleep Disorder Program, and so they'll provide devices to patients that qualify from a medical, obviously, and a financial point of view as well. So they just can't afford to buy their own CPAP, so there's state funding for that. And the last sort of customer we have, I suppose, is the hospital funding. So the big one in Victoria is the VRSS. So a lot of the patients, I think, end up getting referred into the Austin Hospital, and the VRSS will take care of that. Royal Children's Hospital, etc. Probably, I mean, the big learning for me is a lot of our NDIS patients are set up through providers that we select. So there's hundreds of CPAP shops around Australia that have ResMed accounts, but we only allow the ones with sufficient skill and expertise to sell bi-level devices and ventilation devices. So the way we've sort of set up Australia is in each state we aim to have a provider of ResMed ventilation for NDIS patients at home. We don't want everyone to have access because then we run into issues with quality and training and things. So I've spoken to Amanda, and we do have a few sort of select partners around the state. We're still open in some areas. I mean, a big sort of blind side for me is naively when I came into the role, I assumed that every ventilator-dependent patient in Victoria would end up getting referred through to the NDIS, and I was really pleasantly surprised to hear that Victoria is such a big market for intensive care at home, and there is that need for sort of NDIS funding outside of the VRSS service. Our partners who do provide the ventilators, they do training for the families and the carers and things, but they've definitely identified there is this need or this lack of support for the patients in their homes. So I was really happy to talk with Amanda and Patrik just about the service that intensive care at home provide, because they can help the patients get the appropriate funding, and they can, I suppose, make sure that there is appropriate levels of care in the home. And there was just a massive gap there, basically. So a lot of the partners that we were selling the ventilator to, and they would then go on and talk to provide that to the family, were obviously getting a lot of requests for training and things like that, and it was really, they're operating out of their area of expertise. So intensive care at home is a really good partner for us, I suppose, because they can work with the hospital, make sure we get appropriate funding, and make sure the patient's got appropriate nursing support at the home. So I think, Amanda's, you've been to one of our events up in Queensland, but definitely my sort of pitch, I suppose, to the physicians in the hospitals is, ResMed have really great products. We work with partners that we trust to sell the ventilation, so we can train them sort of one-on-one and make sure that they know what they're talking about. But I guess the third sort of pillar to that, I suppose, would be we're working with intensive care at home to provide the appropriate support for the patient, so the physicians are comfortable discharging the patient's home. But definitely in one of the conversations I've had, I realised that is super hard to do. I think ethically though, I'm 100% behind it, because I think it's better for the patients, better for their quality of life. And if you look at the overall spend for the government, it's just so much more economical than keeping someone in an ICU bed. And I'd rather definitely be at home. So Were there any questions or any comments just on that? That sort of. Have I got it right?
I think it's really informative that, and just how NDIS is getting so much tighter, but the quality for someone to be at home versus in hospital is so much better for their mental health as well as that. So I love what Patrick's doing, and I love this support of the services that you're providing to help
Yeah.
make that happen as well. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Good. Seems like I'm sort of on the right track.
Yeah.
Which is good. Yeah, but definitely I think like if you do, you know, I sort of work in wholesale, I suppose, so I try and avoid selling a device directly to a patient. We really want a good local provider that can provide that support. I mean, when I started in this role, we had patients emailing residents saying, I'm out of filters or I'm out of tubes, can you send us more? And of course we did, but what they really should have had was a local provider that could provide all their consumables and answer all their questions and things. Someone local from a device support point of view, but then we also want to make sure that the patient's looked after in terms of the nursing support as well, and that helps me rest soundly at night knowing that we're not just flogging off ventilators, we're making sure that the patients are getting discharged appropriately. And I think that resonates really well with the hospitals too. You know, they want to make sure that they get that bed free, but the patient's not going to bounce back into hospital or be at risk at home. So 100% behind it, it's good. So glad I met you. So glad I followed your emails for so many years, Patrick, wondering, who is this guy? You know, and then I met you and I'm like, hey, you know, we're like old friends. I just thought I'd give a really fast overview of just ResMed. Apologies, Joe. So nice to see you, though. I haven't seen you since pre-COVID, I think, right? You're looking well. So anyway. And does anyone have any patients on CPAP machines? Any clients on CPAP?
CPAP and BiPAP.
Okay.
Yes, I probably didn't go into that much detail earlier. There is a small segment of our clients that don't have tracheostomies,
Yeah.
need BiPAP or CPAP, often going hand in hand with seizure management.
Okay.
Right? And also there are clients that have a tracheostomy but are not ventilated.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's all of that.
Okay.
Yeah,
No,
definitely
excellent.
definitely CPAP.
Okay, yeah, cool. So it is, so I don't want to talk if it's not relevant. So this is the latest ResMed CPAP machine, the AirSense 11, came after the AirSense 10. So just quickly, it's a much more modern design. The reliability is better. We always sort of improve it. It's like if you buy the latest car or the latest laptop, it will be better than the previous generation. You know, the design, it's sort of funny, but you know, this is a product that patients have to accept in their home. So if you make it look really nice, it just helps with that, you know, rather than a big box and a big mask and all that sort of stuff. The machine itself, you can use it with an app, and the app helps the patient sort of understand their therapy. So if they've got any questions on how you adjust the mask and things, the app will tell them that. And I think we're not trying to replace you know, one-on-one sort of education of patients and things, but I know if I go to the doctor, I get this whole lot of information. I try and write it down if I can. I go home and I can't remember half of it. So for someone starting CPAP, you know, they've got their diagnosis and they've got to deal with all the new equipment and things. So they get educated, of course, face to face, hopefully. Then having an app you can refer back to if you do have a leaky mask or you want to understand how the tub works or whatever, is really handy for a lot of patients. And the idea is to reduce the load of troubleshooting. It has this thing in it called care check-in. So the ResMed machines and most of the machines, I think, for a couple of years have been connected. So we put a mobile phone chip inside our devices. So a hospital or a physician can actually log into a website and just see how the patient's going. That's the same with our NIV ventilation devices as well. So the website will show the usage, how many apneas the patients are having. If they're on a ventilator, it will show the minute ventilation, their respiratory rate. You can change settings on some of the devices as well, which is, again, in the home care setting, is really useful. Care check-in on the CPAP device just asks the patient the question, how are you going? So we get all this clinical sort of objective data on how the patient's going on their therapy, but a good question is, how's your therapy going? Are you happy? Is it a thumb up or is it a thumb down? Some patients might have high leak at their mask, they might be happy with that. Other patients, you might look at their clinical data and it looks all great, but they're still not happy. You see them face to face. So this is just asking how you going. They answer on the screen, yes or no, and that'll appear on the website, so you can see. The other thing it has is over-the-air upgrades. So CPAP devices, we can't say, I think most of the manufacturers say you can use it for about 5 years. A lot of them get used for a lot longer than that. If they break, they usually break in the first 6 months, but then after that they tend to last for a fairly long time. I guess with everything these days, we can apply an over-the-air upgrade to the software. So if we want to introduce a new feature onto the device, you know, the one that the patient bought 4 years ago can just get upgraded, like your phone will upgrade to the latest software. Also, touch wood, if we have, you know, some sort of issue where we have to do a recall, there might be a chance that we can just roll out the upgrade over the air, so people don't have to take their machines back, you know, to their dealer and get it sent back for service and things. So that's the Essence 10. I just thought maybe just to close, it'd be worth just going through the ResMed portfolio of ventilators. Are people fairly familiar with the ResMed machines, the Lumises and the Stellas and the Astrals and things?
Yeah, so thanks very much for that. So it's fair to say that all of our clients have a ResMed ventilator.
Yeah.
There were some exceptions in the early days through the Children's Hospital, as you're probably aware.
We're fixing that.
But all of our adult clients in all states have a ResMed ventilator.
Yeah.
The support has always been amazing, right? And Kathy is here now. Kathy, our nurse educator / resource nurse. Kathy has been heavily involved in the education of staff. You know, I don't know, Kathy, whether you've just walked in, I know, maybe open up the education, how it worked. You know, obviously there's online resources, but there was also Tim Given, who has been out to see our clients and do education one-on-one on the client's side. You know, Trevor.
Yeah, Trevor's great. Oh, you know, yeah, okay, thanks.
So we used to do online with Trevor Ford as well in New South Wales, because Trevor was able to meet our nurses face to face and give them a face to face in service on the bench.
Yeah.
For our Victorian clients or for our Victorian nurses, that wasn't possible at all times. So we would then video link him up with face to face on study days or one to one with the nurse. They'd organise it on themselves. But I got to get to know his spiel, so then I took that over and do it face to face with the nurses as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate your support there. It's so important. I'll send you a link as well to, we've got the ResMed Academy online that Tim Given was pretty influential in setting up as well. So Tim Given worked for ResMed a couple of years ago now. He came out of the VRSS, so really knowledgeable, just excellent. I don't have a clinical background. Tim did have a clinical background.
But Richard, just on that note, maybe, you know, like again, for an ICU nurse looking at the ResMed ventilator, it's not rocket science.
No.
Anyone that's worked in
absolutely.
ICU for any length of time has worked with the Drager, with the Puritan Bennett, with the Siemens, whatever has happened.
Absolutely.
So you have to adapt to different ventilators in ICU depending on where you work, if you work agency, you know. Then in the community, you're dealing with mainly with the Astral 100. So, you know, it's not
Absolutely, yeah, and I think you're spot on. Like our machines are they're like little toys compared to the ICU ventilators. You know, they're a home care product. So.
But the reality also is, as far as I can see, it pretty much provides everything that the Drager or the Puritan Bennett is providing in ICU or Covidian now.
Yeah.
It's just on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
You need an SIV mode or a CPAP mode. Well, the ResMed is doing it all.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I
Well, I heard
find the Astral very sophisticated for the repackaged.
Yeah.
The only thing is just navigation, it's the language that they use, and they're just getting the head around, okay, well, it's this symbol if I want to find this symbol, it's this other symbol if I want to find that. And that's the only.
Just finding the buttons and things like that. Yeah.
Which is the same as on any ventilator.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I actually find the Astral. I mean, we'll start at the top. So. The Astral 100 and the 150, they're ResMed's life support level ventilators. So they're indicated down to 5 kilos or a 50 mil tidal volume, all the way up to sort of 50 centimetres for an obesity hyperventilation patient. They are very versatile, so you can use them with a single limb circuit with a link mask, like a basic NIV. The Astral 100 and 150 will support a single limb with an active valve circuit. So not a passive valve, an active valve, and the 150 you can set up with a full dual limb circuit. So the dual limb circuit will measure the exhale tidal volume of the patient. So it's getting pretty close to what you would have in an ICU. I mean, the focus on the Astral is really making it as small and light and as portable as we could, getting a really big battery in there, so it's an 8-hour battery. The platform itself has been around for a couple of years, but it's had lots of software upgrades, so it's at a really nice stable point in its life cycle now. Really popular at the moment, actually getting a lot of inquiries from the different hospitals and things. So that's sort of the life support side, and I guess when we say it's a life support ventilator, from a design point of view, the team has to comply with certain regulations, because we know if the machine stops, the patient will pass away. So the machines themselves will have a lot of redundancy built into them. They'll check, there'll be more than one pressure sensor and more than one flow sensor, and they check each other to make sure that it's all accurate. If the battery fails, there has to be something else to sound an alarm, so the carers are aware of that. So there's a lot of extra sort of safety mechanisms that are put into those sorts of devices. They're also designed to be used potentially 24 hours a day as well. Any questions particularly on the Astral? I mean, I know a lot of you might be sort of fairly familiar with it, but do you have any burning questions about it? Do you want to?
I don't have any burning questions, and I don't think our staff in general have any burning questions. I don't know, Kathy.
No, they would only like to know how do you change a setting when
Yep.
it's locked.
When it's like,
2 fingers.
yeah, well, that's it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's, I mean, you have So it was interesting. So on other ResMed devices, it's this sort of 2-finger press to unlock the clinical menu and make changes to the settings. On Astral, because the use case might be someone wanting to get into the clinical menu quickly in a hospital, it's just a padlock that you press and hold. You'll notice on the screen there's a lot of, if you stop ventilation, it'll ask you to confirm that, and it asks you to confirm it in a different area on the screen. So it's sort of stop and hold, press that for 3 seconds, then confirm over here. Because they're worried about a teddy bear or something falling on the screen, or something knocking on the back of the wheelchair and accidentally turning it off. So all those things have to be really carefully considered. So Astral, and there's a lot of accessories with the Astral as well. So we have mobility bags, we have external batteries. The more recent versions have got a specific mouthpiece ventilation mode, and that seems to be gaining a little bit of traction, I suppose. Does anyone have patients on mouthpiece ventilation?
We didn't. I remember them from Germany.
Yeah.
But we didn't here.
Yeah, it's a little bit slower evolving. I think in Europe it was spec'd on the Astral years ago because there was demand. Hasn't quite got to Australia yet. Yeah, but it's a great option for patients. They don't have to wear a mask. They can just take a sip from a mouthpiece, so you can talk, and less invasive, which is great. So the next model down is the Stella 150. So the Stella 150 is just a leak ventilator. That's the main thing. So it only supports a single passive circuit, so a mask with just a hole in it, a leak valve. It doesn't have the active valve circuits. Stella does have an internal battery. It's got a 2-hour battery, but it's not indicated for life support. So if there's a patient, a spinal patient who needs the machine, and if it turns off, they'll pass away, they really need an Astral. Stella's more for the patients as they become a little bit more dependent. They're starting to use a little bit of NIV during the day and things, and having the battery just makes the device a little bit more portable, gives a bit of battery backup, and things like that. Because Stella is used on more dependent patients, it still has the full suite of alarms on it as well. And then we sort of get down into the Lumis devices. So we've got the Lumis STA. So S is spontaneous mode, T is a timed mode, and the A just stands for alarms. So a lot of the children's hospitals like the Lumis STA. Sometimes they even use them for their kids that are just on CPAP, just because they want the alarm function on the device. So if the device stops or if there's high leak, the alarm will go off and the parents or the carers can come in and make sure that everything's okay. So Lumis STA is kind of the fanciest of the Lumis range, and then we've got the ST. It just doesn't have the alarms on it. The STA goes up to 30 centimetres of pressure, so sometimes if a patient, and usually it's the adults, the really big adults, if they do need a higher pressure, they'll be prescribed an STA. The alarms are turned on, but they just want the higher pressure on the device. I think as a manufacturer, we're not allowed to make a device that goes above 25 centimetres without alarms on it. So to get to 30, it has to be the STA. You've got the Lumis ST, which is probably the most common one, so it just gives a spontaneous and a timed mode. And then the Lumis S, which isn't really very popular in Australia. People tend to go to the ST, but that's just a spontaneous mode device. The Lumis devices, these all have an inbuilt sort of mobile phone chip inside them, which I know the VRSS, they really like that technology. It allows them to manage a large fleet of patients, a large cohort of patients more efficiently, I suppose. So they've got like everyone, they've got limited resources, so they can select which patients they really need to prioritise for a visit, or if someone's due, for an appointment at the hospital, they can actually review how that patient's going and potentially do a telehealth rather than have the patient come in. So that connectivity is really really valuable, I think. And they can also make adjustments to settings as well. So for your progressive patients and motor neuron patients and things, you can make adjustments to settings without having to physically go and see the patient. You can connect the Stellar and Astral devices to AirView, which is the website as well, but there's a separate module that you have to use to plug into the devices. Unfortunately, that module at the moment is 3G, and we're working on a 4G one. The 3G network is turning off at the end of this month. You might have seen in the news. I don't know if they've delayed it. There was a bit of controversy around emergency calls from old mobile phones and things. But so connectivity for the Stellar through the Astral is going to not be available, but then we're looking to get that back sort of early next year. That'll be really important. Okay, I think I went through that anyway. That's our latest mask. So it's the F40, under the nose, sort of oral mask, very small. It's got a flexible frame, so a lot of the masks are quite stiff and hard, whereas this one will just sort of flex and bend to the patient. And it's smaller, so it's just less obtrusive for the patients themselves. So that's been out for about a month now. I think it's going quite well. A lot of people seem to like it. Okay, so that's it. So they're my details. Take a photo or grab a card if you like. If you do have any inquiries about resident machines or places where your patients can get a resident ventilator, please just give us a call or send us an email. Hopefully we'll be able to put you in touch with one of our sort of wholesale partners, I think. But if there's no one available, we're happy to sort of provide one directly, but we definitely prefer to work with someone like a partner, I suppose, just because you get better support that way as well. But thanks again for the invite to the day. It's really great. Nice to meet you.